Good morning, or good afternoon, I should say, whichever time this presentation is shown. Before beginning today's presentation, which is the last in the current series, Carol and I want to express our appreciation for the opportunity over the last 10 weeks to share insights into the places we have lived and visited. Thank you for your cards, letters, and telephone calls. They have been very much appreciated. So much so, they have motivated us to work hard to produce several more presentations this summer to be given in the fall. Till then, thank you for the privilege of sharing some of our 55 years of marriage with you. Today we are going to be visiting wild and wonderful West Virginia, but in particular the Eastern Panhandle, an area that is not far away, as you'll see in a couple of minutes. But let me give you a little background on West Virginia first, that you may or may not be aware of. Prior to the Civil War, Virginia, and now what is West Virginia, were one state. After the war, those counties that had fought with the Union side became West Virginia, and those that had fought on the Confederate side remained as part of Virginia. But always after a war, the winners get to take more than perhaps the normal separation. And there was an exception. 3 counties which form what's called the Eastern Panhandle of West Virginia were part of the Confederate side of the war. But they were awarded to the new state of West Virginia. They should have been part of Virginia, and today they still have a mindset that they're part of Virginia. Why did that happen? Because that area that became West Virginia felt trapped and did not have good transportation systems. Those 3 counties had railroads and rivers that provided access to what is now West Virginia. So therefore, they got West Virginia. As I mentioned, particularly 2 out of the 3 counties have a mindset that they're still part of Virginia and not West Virginia. And to an extent, the rest of West Virginia has that mindset also. The Panhandle is just as wild and wonderful as the rest of the state. But as I mentioned earlier, the key thing is all 3 counties have the Potomac River, and that is important to their economy, and in yesteryears it was very important to the survival of that area. For those of you who have never visited the Panhandle, it is very close. You look at the upper part of this map, just above New Windsor, you see the little red oval. Theoretically, that's where we live. You journey down to Frederick and go out to where I've made the larger oval. That is the start of the Panhandle of West Virginia. The oval is where we're going to be visiting today. Particularly, we're going to be visiting 3 major towns and some areas in between: Harpers Ferry, Shepherdstown, both of which are in West Virginia, and Sharpsburg, which is in Maryland. We'll begin by first visiting Harper's Ferry. The town was named after Robert Harper, who operated a ferry starting there in 1747. In 1794, George Washington visited Harper's Ferry and was impressed by its location at the confluence of the Potomac and Shenandoah rivers and the natural beauty of the town. Washington selected the town as a site for the new National Armory. By the 1850s, Harper's Ferry emerged as a significant transportation hub for most of the East Coast, with the building of the Chesapeake and Ohio Canal and the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad. This is a close-up of downtown Harper's Ferry. It is known mostly for the radical abolitionist John Brown, who raided Harper's Ferry and its arsenal in October of 1859. John Brown was known as the murderer of slaveholders in what was called Bleeding Kansas. But in 1859, John Brown determined that he would free slaves in Virginia by instigating a revolt that would spread throughout the slaveholding state. To begin his slave revolt, Brown planned to capture the arsenal at Harper's Ferry and use its weapons to arm his followers. Brown's raid, however, was doomed from the start. It was poorly planned. He was not able to get any weapons or ammunition, and he was unable to recruit any slaves to join his rebellion. As a result, Brown and his men were trapped in the arsenal and surrounded by Maryland and Virginia militia. He was later executed for his crimes. This is another picture of Harper's Ferry. But I need to point out a couple of things. The arsenal was destroyed at one point. The day after Virginia seceded from the Union, federal soldiers rushed in and burnt the armory and the arsenal. Between 1861 and 1865, Harper's Ferry changed between Confederate and Union forces 14 times. This is the armory. It was rebuilt after the Civil War. Since 1944, Harper's Ferry has became a national park. But there's a little anecdote to this whole thing. During the Civil War, St. Peter's Roman Catholic Church, which sits up high on the hill, avoided damage, although the town was repeatedly bombardments and contests, as we say, struggling back and forth between Confederate and Union forces. They were able to protect the church by flying a British Union Jack over the church. Besides visiting Harper's Ferry itself, thousands of people during the summer come to the rivers, both the Shenandoah and the Potomac. It's a great place for tubing and kayaking, and there's lots of companies that provide you that service. But I've got to warn you, as you can see from the picture on the left, it's a pretty rocky area. And in the summer, as the level of the rivers go down, it gets a little bit more, sometimes difficult to get through those rocks. Harpers Ferry is almost also famous as a stopover on the Appalachian Trail. The Appalachian Trail stretches from Maine to Georgia, although people start mostly in Georgia and go north, and passes right through the center of Harpers Ferry. While it is not exactly the midpoint of the trail, many who hike the trail from one end to the other see it as a psychological midpoint, and one that has lots of good places to rest and eat, which is not always the case along the trail. You can see it's not exactly the middle of the trail by a little over 100 miles. Mentally, I've wanted to hike the trail, but I've never done it physically. However, one of our friends, when we lived in Shepherdstown, used to be in charge of organizing volunteers who maintain the entire trail, including its lean-tos. I've had many discussions with him, and it's a difficult job. You can think about maintaining a trail that's over 2,000 miles long and in the middle of the woods. The Potomac River is that river coming in from the left, and it originates a little bit west of Cumberland, Maryland, and it comes down in a north to east type flow until it gets to Harpers Ferry, and then it heads almost due south, entering into the Chesapeake Bay down at Point Lookout. The Shenandoah River, which is the one from the bottom right, it is unique in the continental United States. Most rivers flow either to the west or to the southwest. This river flows north through the Shenandoah Valley and joins the Potomac River to become the Potomac River going south. This slide allows me to explain some unique geographical facts. You can see that's Harpers Ferry in the lower portion of the picture. If you follow both, those are railroad bridges, by the way, across to that other landmass, you're looking at the state of Maryland. But the landmass is not just the state of Maryland. The state of Maryland owns the entire Potomac River. In both West Virginia and in Virginia, what Maryland owns up to the high water mark. That means at a low, when the water levels are low, you can be standing, whether you think you're in West Virginia or in Virginia, on the opposite bank from Maryland, but you're still standing in Maryland. As such, Maryland constructs and maintains all the bridges going across the Potomac River. We are now across from Harpers Ferry, heading up the Potomac River towards where Carol and I lived in Shepherdstown. The photo on the left was known when it was created as the Big Ditch. We know it as the Chesapeake and Ohio Canal. The picture on the right is the old towpath where the mules would tow the barges along the canal. Today, except for some of these locks, as we'll see later on, most of the big ditch is covered in vegetation. You can see some of the canal sometimes, but for the most part, not for the most part, but all part, the towpath is now a walking and bicycle path that is maintained by the National Park Service. The canal was in operation from 1831 to 1924 and went from Washington, D.C. to Cumberland, Maryland. Its principal cargo was coal from the Allegheny Mountains coming into Washington and Baltimore. This is one of the locks. The barge goes in, fill up with water, and then you go on to the next level. The canal is 184.5 miles long. It began construction in 1825. It was an engineering feat. Required the construction of 74 locks, 11 aqueducts were built to cross major streams, and more than 240 culverts to cross smaller streams, and one very long tunnel of 318 feet at Paw Paw, West Virginia. Let's go back. 3,118 feet. Carol and I have had the experience of walking through that tunnel. This part of the Potomac is pretty rocky, and you can do some real damage if you have a canoe. My son and I once paddled a 12-mile section of the Potomac, and we were exhausted. Exhausted because we kept having to paddle hard to avoid hitting rocks, particularly submerged one. Welcome to Shepherdstown, our home prior to coming to CLV. We lived there for 9 years. You can see the Potomac River adjacent to the town as it snakes around through the countryside. Shepherdstown is actually up on a high bluff overlooking the Potomac. Shepherdstown is very close to Maryland. Remember, that land across those bridges is the state of Maryland. As a matter of fact, we were 15 miles from Hagerstown, Maryland. As I said before, all the bridges are owned by the state of Maryland. So when we lived in Shepherdstown, we were close to Maryland. We had lived in Ellicott City for 34 years, so we didn't move too far away from Maryland. Shepherdstown, as the picture shows, was founded in 1734, but it didn't become an official town or city until 1762. And it is the oldest town in the entire state of West Virginia. Shepherdstown is unique, particularly in West Virginia. From a demographics perspective, it is one of the most educated towns in the state. 62% of the population over the age of 25 years old have a bachelor's degree. 43% have graduate degrees. It has the highest per capita income in the entire state of West Virginia. Its politics are very, very liberal. A large percentage of the current population are retirees like Carol and myself, who have lived in the Baltimore, Washington area for many years of their lives. This is German Street, the main street and the one most tourists see, which, although it is very pretty, it's a shame that most tourists don't go behind this street and see the alleys and side streets, which I'll be showing you a little bit later. Shepherdstown is always in a mode of celebration. At Christmas, the buildings along German Street are ringed in white lights for Christmas. Because Shepherdstown economy is dependent to a large extent on what's called day trippers coming from the Baltimore, Washington area, it has made significant investment in making its streets accessible. The sidewalks go way beyond the requirements of the American Disabilities Act, but they have worked very, very hard to keep the historical feel of the town. Staying on German Street, some of the shops along the way, but I wanted to call your attention to that taller building with the red brick along the right side. You can see it's a Masonic temple. It's the local Masonic temple. During his youth, and George Washington lived in the area, a number of the houses outside of Shepherdstown were actual homes that relatives of George Washington owned. When he lived there, George Washington was a member of this Masonic temple. And when Carol and I first went to Shepherdstown in 2005, you could go in and see the apron. Members of the Masonic Lodge wear a white apron. You could see George Washington's apron. It is currently not there. It's on loan to another temple down in Alexandria, Virginia. There's a picture again at Christmas time of some of the shops that appeal to the tourists that come. The blue building, as you can see by its name, is the Opera House. And it really was an opera house at one time. Today, it is a movie house. But I've got to warn you, get there early if you want to see a movie and be comfortable. Because the seats are very, very hard. And there are only a limited number of pillows. So people rush in and grab the pillows. Shepherdstown is a very, very dog-friendly town. Dogs even have their own drinking water supplied by a local spring. And if you were there for the Christmas parade, which we did many times, everybody in town that has a dog leads the Christmas parade, and their dogs are all dressed up in crazy costumes. This is a picture of some of the restaurants in Shepherdstown. If you're going to have tourists, you better have good restaurants. On the top left is a restaurant I'm going to leave for right now and come back to in a few minutes. But if you go to town and you're just looking for a little lunch snack, go to the sweet shop, the bakery. It is fantastic. And if you have a dog, don't worry, you can take it inside, or you can sit outside and eat whatever you purchase. The picture on the right was previously the best restaurant in town. It was called the Yellow Brick Bank. It was so good that when President Reagan was in office, and when Nancy would visit Camp David, Nancy would helicopter over to Shepherdstown to have a meal at the Yellow Brick Bank. Unfortunately, the chef left the Yellow Brick Bank and opened up his own restaurant uptown, up the street. It's the one all the way to the left. I'll come back to it in a minute. Some of the other restaurants are Betty's off to the right. That's the local breakfast joint. Kazoo has some of the best Thai food that I've ever tasted. And there's a very nice little grill and bar down there at the left. Those are only a few of the restaurants. I mentioned the bakery. One of its specials at Christmas is German stolen bread. Just as good as I have had in Germany. Nearby Shepherdstown is a restaurant and small hotel that has 3 Michelin stars. It attracts a lot of folks from Washington. The only problem I have with it is you don't order from the menu. You get what the chef cooks that evening. I mentioned the chef from the Yellow Brick Bank opened his own restaurant. It's called the Press Room. As you can see, it's in a building that dates back to 1793. It is the restaurant in town. It is only open for dinner. And I've got to tell you, it's very hard to get a reservation. This is the restaurant that most people, or a lot of people in the Baltimore, Washington area have heard of. It's called the Bavarian Inn. It sits high above the Potomac on a bluff and has very beautiful views. You can also stay there. It's also a hotel. Its primary food is German, and the waitresses all dress in German outfits. This is the formal dining room. I say formal because men are required to wear a jacket and tie. When Carol and I would eat there, we would not eat in a formal dining room. There is an informal dining room downstairs where most of the locals go to eat. Back to German Street and one of the many open-air fests. Roads closed down, these tents are put up, and all these vendors come along. It's great fun. But I would call your attention to the right side of the picture and the Rubber Ducky Classic. You buy one of these little ducks, rubber ducky, like to go into a bath for kids. You put your name on it, indelible. And at a later date, the rubber duckies are released into a stream that starts about 1.5 miles out of town and goes through town, goes under some of the buildings in town, and flows down to the Potomac River. The first Ducky to reach the Potomac wins a prize. The proceeds from this particular event go to the local ministerial fund, which helps the less fortunate in the area. You think Westminster has parades. You've got to think again. This is a town where you get in a parade, you get in the front. I mentioned everybody with those dogs gets up front in the Christmas parade. You go through the parade, and then you become the observers of the rest of the parade. And it is something to behold. Again, this is German Street. The building to the left is Shepherd University Alumni Center. Shepherd University is to the road to the left, and we'll come to it in a few minutes. But the wall, an unassuming wall sitting there with two people on it currently, is the focal point of Shepherdstown. People sit there. People hold impromptu sing fests. Also on the second Sunday, the morning of the second Sunday of the month, it is a free market. You can bring whatever you want to get rid of, put it on the wall. And you can take anything else that you see there that you want from the wall. No charge. So the wall gets lots of things. Here's one student who's practicing his guitar and playing it for people as they go passing by. Coming into town, you might see a building a little run down at times that would be typical of quote West Virginia, but it's more than typical. This is O'Hurley's Country Store or General Store. As you pass it by, you might question stopping there, but I tell you, it's worth the trip inside. This is O'Hurley here in front of his dulcimer. He's got anything and everything, and the store goes much further back than these two pictures show. But it's more than a store. To the left side of the store, he built another room, large open room. And on Thursday nights, all the local musicians go there for jam sessions. And in December on Thursday night, it's reserved for singing Christmas carols. This is the very small library building. Always loved that tree out in front of it. As you can see, it always wasn't a library, but that's what it is today. But it is crammed full. It actually has 2 floors, and it is crammed full of books. And if you can't find the book, they will go to every library within 150 miles, including Maryland, Virginia, and West Virginia, and find that book for you. And if you can't find it, you can go up German Street, a couple of doors, and there is an outstanding book store there, 3 floors of that bookstore. Behind the library, there are lots and lots of gatherings. This one's in the winter, sort of a winter fest type thing. But in the summer, like right now, every Saturday and Sunday, there are farmers markets. People bring in their produce and various things to sell. At Christmas, Christmas trees and Christmas wreaths are sold there. This is a collection of the churches in town, some new, some old. The Catholic Church up to the top left is rather unique in its architecture. But the Catholic Church up there and the church all the way at the right, down the bottom, has a connection that I'll talk about in a minute. Some of these churches, that's a Lutheran church down to the left, that's the Episcopal church in the right, that's the United Church of Christ church in the upper right, and in the lower center is a Methodist church. A number of the churches in town have a long history, and we'll talk about that in a second. Right now, as a matter of fact. This is the church that we went to. There has been a church on this site since 1743. One part, not the white part, but the red part, has been around since just before the Civil War. There's both bad and good when looking at that church. If you went around to the front, you'd find there are two doors. The main sanctuary door and a door on the right. It was where blacks could only go, and they could only go up in the balcony. That balcony has been removed because this is a very, very open church, open to everybody. But there's a second part of the history. During the Civil War, Shepherdstown became the hospitals for the injured over at the Battle of Antietam across the way in Maryland. Very sad. At the edge of that white part of the building, there's some steps that go up, but then you can go down into the basement. And the basement is dirt. And you can look up at the rafters. And when you do, you will see that they are stained by the blood of those injured and dying that were treated in that church. But it's a church that's very modern today. That square or rectangular are solar panels. We had to go through a fight and a half because all the buildings in town that have historical backgrounds, you have to get the commission to make changes. And nobody wanted a solar panel in town. We succeeded. Today, that solar panel totally provides power for the church and provides power, excess power, to the community. Talking about the historical commission, you'll see there's a wall. It's hard to see here to note that that's a stone wall that has been up, as I say, since beginning prior to the Civil War. Well, about 7 years ago, maybe 8 years ago, that wall started to crumble and it needed to be repaired by going behind it and providing a place for water to drain out underneath the wall. So we went to the commission and they said, yes, you can repair it, but you've got to number each stone and put it back in the same place from whence you took it. I'm not going to tell you whether we did or we did not. Nobody ever looked to see. The next few slides, I'm going to be quiet and give you a tour of the town, and particularly some of the flowers that you can see in the yards of the houses, particularly from their back alleys. There is a garden tour every May. There's a charge for the tour. You get to go see the gardens and go in some of the houses. But at the end of the tour, in one of the buildings, there is a tea with desserts and actually tea. There is a charge for the tour, and all of that money, again, goes to charity. Showed you some of the gardens, but I'm now going to show you some of the houses. This is the smallest house. You actually can go into this thing, and it's on the campus of Shepherd University. It was built many, many years ago by some of the students there at the university. Tourists love to have their picture taken in front of the little house. This is the ancestral home of the founder of Shepherdstown, Thomas Shepherd. This is some more of the houses in town. You may have seen the one in the center in a previous slide. The picture to the lower left is the parsonage of the Episcopal Church. I'm going to show you what's in just behind that door. To the right, you have a log house, but you notice it has a modern roof and now a modern chimney. There are a number of houses that are over 150 years old within the town. They are very, very expensive to purchase. This is the interior of the parsonage of the Episcopal Church, and very, very ornate. I've attended a couple of meetings there in that parlor. This is a house that Carol and I love. You can't see from the picture, but back to the left, there's a lovely garden out back. There's money in Shepherdstown, and this is a house that sits just on the outskirts of town, overlooking the Potomac River. There is also a private golf course and home community. There's another house that Carol and I love. It sits on an 80-acre farm. But the house that we really love is this one. It was our house for 9 years. Some of you know that I'm a cheap Scotsman. Look at the flag. If you look to the barrel coming down, I had several of these barrels around that emptied out into draining hoses that went around the garden, so I didn't need to water. I would just unleash water out of the barrel and it would feed all of my plants. You've heard me mention building stone walls. Over to the left, that's one of my stone walls. Sitting high above the Potomac is a small park and monument. The monument's not that small. It's dedicated to the memory of an individual you've probably never heard the name of, James Rumsey. But he changed American life. He was the inventor of the steam-powered boat in 1787. And he invented it in Shepherdstown, West Virginia. I've mentioned Shepherd University. It began in 1872 as a teacher college, like many schools of that period. As you know, schools like Towson used to be a teacher's college. Today, it is a thriving school offering a number of different disciplines. Surprisingly to me, many of the students who attend come from Maryland. But remember, Maryland's only a 5-minute drive away. This is a picture of the campus. Not all of the campus, is more behind this picture. It's right along the Potomac, but the campus is intricately linked with the rest of the community. It's linked socially, intellectually, and culturally. And yes, as supporters of the football team there at the field in the center. This is the athletic building, or wellness center, their wellness center. One of the benefits of living in Shepherdstown, you can have a membership that allows you to use the school's facilities. Carol and I used that Olympic-sized pool, the exercise rooms, and an indoor elevated track almost daily. What we loved about the pool was we almost had it to ourselves most of the time, except for the lifeguards. The students didn't tend to come swimming. They used the rest of the facility, but they didn't go swimming. Part of it's because they've got this gorgeous pool, but they don't have a swim team. That was deeply disappointing. They got teams of everything else, but not a swim team. The only thing that used to trouble us was 1 week in July. They would empty that entire pool and then hire a bunch of students to go in and use scrub brushes to scrub every inch of the tiles and then flush it out and then refill it. It was always amazing to me that you realized how hard that water had become over a year, and when it was refreshed in July, it was so much easier to swim. Might have been my imagination, but that's how it felt. Not shown, places have racquetball courts, lots of basketball courts, volleyball courts, weightlifting, whole 9 yards. And actually, if you look at the top picture, you'll see the treadmills, some treadmills there. They're standing looking out, and you can look out over a very beautiful wooded area as you're on your treadmill. This is an interesting story. You may not recognize the gentleman in the upper left-hand corner, but it is Senator Robert Byrd of the state of West Virginia. He has since passed. He lived in Shepherdstown, and he brought a lot of federal money to the area. This is one of the many buildings on a 150-acre Homeland Security training facility. Train everybody from those that protect the borders to all the rest of what the Homeland Security does today. But it's really wild the building on the right is one of 3 Coast Guard facilities on the outskirts of Shepherdstown. And the lakes, the river can't really be transported. You can't go up and down it with large vessels, very many vessels, several dams along the Potomac. But he got 3 Coast Guard facilities there. There's also an internal revenue processing. There's also a facility for one of the intelligence agencies. The list goes on. I don't know how he did it. This is again at Shepherd University. And this is a building dedicated to his wife. It is a nursing school. But this is the jewel of what Senator Byrd brought to the area. It is the National Conservation Training Center. The name really does not denote what its importance. It is also the secondary headquarters of the Department of Interior. The picture on the right, most of the buildings are what's called post and beam. There is a 125-foot high screen in an auditorium that you can go and see movies. I was part of a camera club that you could take your pictures, and every week you could show up to 3 of your pictures. You take a picture and show it on that size screen, you see every little problem. As I said, it's situated along the Potomac River. It is a place that not only did training for various parts of the Department of Interior, it would have shows once a month that residents would come, and there'd be 150, 200 people that would show up for particularly film shows or a topic of discussion. One of the other beauties between Harpers Ferry and here, there are a lot of people that are in the film business, particularly wildlife film business, and they would come and give outstanding talks. During the Clinton administration, the training center was also the site of the Israeli-Syrian peace talks. People in Shepherdstown that were there at the time still talk about President Clinton coming downtown, walking around, and then sitting on that wall that I pointed out in the center of town and chatting for hours on end with residents. Shepherdstown has lots of events. It has a rich cultural life. Some a little fanciful, like the Dog Fest, where everybody brings their dogs and walks up and down and shows off their dog. And again, some people have some crazy costumes on the dog. To Boo Fest. Shepherdstown has a history of having some places that are haunted, and it plays up on that at Halloween with this big, gigantic Boo Fest. But the ones that are really consequential is the American Conservation Film. It is a 3-day session where you have filmmakers from around the world that come and show wildlife films. Some of the best were from students from around the world, and they're awarded prizes and so on and so forth. But it is absolutely a fantastic event. Unfortunately, neither of them are being held this year. When I say neither or none of them, there's another one, Contemporary American Theater Festival. You can see the quote. It's one of the nation's most satisfying seasonal destinations for original drama. And from the Washington Post. Both the film festival and the theater festival are yearly reviewed by the Washington Post and the New York Times, and they always get outstanding reviews. The plays are intense. New York and actors from across the country come to participate because it's so well known. Small Town America. In conjunction with the university, Shepherdstown has a symphony orchestra. It's known as the Twin Rivers Symphony. It is amazing, the talent. As I mentioned, we have a lot of retirees, a lot of people that are very, very talented. And the symphonic presentations are excellent. We're going to now start to go down to the Potomac as I pointed out, just adjacent to Shepherdstown. It's a lovely place to just sit and reflect. Or if you're a little energetic, you can get in your kayak or your canoe. There's not as many rocks here. You have to go downstream about 2 miles and about 1.5 miles upstream. It's a nice deep area to paddle around. Lots of good fishing. Remember, you're in Maryland, so if you're a West Virginia resident, you have to get a Maryland fishing license. We're going to leave Shepherdstown and go across the river, and we do. We're in Maryland. There's several ways to get there. You can go downstream about 1.5 miles, or downriver 1.5 miles, and there's a place called Packhorse Ford. Once a year, people go back and forth across this. There's a little, again, celebration. This fjord, or ford, I should say, has been used as far back as the Indians. But it became very important during the Battle of Antietam, when General Lee and his troops retreated. They retreated to Shepherdstown. They did so by coming across this part of the river, which is not very deep. You could hop on a freight train. There are probably 20 to 25 freight trains that go across that bridge every day. It's a main line for Southern Railroad. Or you could just take the bridge across. This is a picture looking from Maryland. You're actually looking up at the part of the hotel of the Bavarian Inn, the Potomac River over the other side of the trees, and part of the towpath for the C&O Canal. This is the part of the towpath that Carol and I would very frequently get on and ride our bikes for quite a distance up. The only problem is when you ride up, you got to ride back. So you're always thinking that as you're going forward. We come to a small town called Sharpsburg. If you do nothing else, there's probably not much else beside Antietam in Sharpsburg, in addition to this building in the picture on the right, Nutter's Ice Cream. Nutter's is famous in the area, and I think all of the folks that go to Antietam, and there are many that tour Antietam Battlefield, hear about Nutter's, and you can see they line up in the summer, and it's worth the line. I swear, my car, when we go through Sharpsburg, automatically turned into the street where Nutter's is located. But if you go there, please, please, please only order a small cone or dish of ice cream. Why? If you only order the small one, you're going to have a hard time finishing it. They give you so much ice cream. And it's only going to cost you $1.75. And you get to choose from 30 different flavors. And the plus is, it is great ice cream. I mentioned we're in Sharpsburg. This is the way Sharpsburg looked during the Civil War. Sharpsburg is the location of the Antietam battlefield, a large battlefield just to the northeast of town. I didn't want to show you a picture of the way it looked today. I prefer showing you how it looked when the troops were there. I'm not going to go through the battle. I'm just going to tell you two things. It's called the Battle of Antietam because there is a Antietam Creek that runs through it. The battlefield. It was a terrible battle. There were more Union troops than there were Confederate troops. And it turned out to be the bloodiest day in the American Civil War and the bloodiest day in the history of all conflicts of the United States. In one day, from sun up to sundown, there were 23,000 casualties. Let me say that again. 23,000 people died. Today, the battleground is a national park, and you can tour it and learn about the entire battle. It always amazed me when we'd have visitors from the UK or Europe. They would always they had heard about Antietam. Very Americans haven't heard about Antietam. But they had heard about Antietam and they wanted to see it. And I became their tour guide. It is a very sacred ground. Has monuments and looks a little bit like Gettysburg, but there's some differences. The Park Service tries to keep it as best it can the way it looked during the battle. Well, not necessarily seen in this picture, but that hill over there during the summer will be covered with corn stalks. Today, the Park Service allows farmers to grow the same crops that were grown then on the land. Those corn stalks were the site of a major battle, with troops shooting amongst the corn stalks. This is called Bloody Lane. The building way over in the end is called a shot tower, where you would take molten lead and drop it down, and it would form a ball, and then hit the cold water at the bottom and totally form a shot. It's a ditch, but it is a terrible ditch. 8,000 of the 23,000 died fighting over this ditch in a 7-hour period. This is the Dunker Church. It was used by the Confederate forces as a headquarters. This is a painting of a battle called the Battle within the Battle of Antietam, the Battle for Burnside Bridge. It's a bridge going across Antietam Creek. The Union forces were on the lower level. Up amongst the trees were the Confederates, and they had a number of sharpshooters. Many were killed taking that bridge. The picture on the right is the way the bridge looked during the time of the Civil War. The picture today is the bridge today, I should say. Sometimes I go there and think it's too pristine for all the deaths that occurred there. This is an older picture, and you look in the center, you can see Lincoln visiting the troops after the war. He came to congratulate the soldiers, just as he did when he went to Gettysburg. Like Gettysburg, Lincoln gave an address on the steps of the house that you see here. house happens to be just across a road from a pharmacy that's out in the middle of nowhere where Carol and I used to go for our prescriptions. Lincoln's address here is well known, but not for the fact that he gave it here. Most of us know about his Gettysburg Address, but this address was just important. It's where, for the first time, he read the Emancipation Proclamation, declaring all slaves freed. If you go to Antietam battlefield in late November, on one evening, you will see the entire battlefield lit up with candles and brown bagged with sand. It's to commemorate all those who died on both sides. They are placed there each year by Boy Scouts from the area. Quite a task, placing 23,000 of those candles and getting them all lit. Cars just progress through that at a very slow pace. It is a very solemn procession. Again, it's not a far journey. I encourage you, if you're out for a ride one day, to go to the Panhandle. You can go down through Mount Airy, you can go down through New Market, take US 340 over to Harpers Ferry, and begin the journey. Hopefully, when the coronavirus is over, and we're free to take trips again, maybe we can organize a trip to the Panhandle of West Virginia. And hopefully in the spring, when all the flowers are in bloom. Again, thank you for watching. You can reach me on that email address if you have any suggestions. Jess is willing to repeat any of the presentations that I have done, any of the 10, but you need to let us know if there are any particular ones you would like to hear again. You can also see them if you have a computer and you go on and you do an internet search on a thing called YouTube, one word. Search on YouTube, click on YouTube. When you get there, you'll see a bunch of different videos. Those are not the ones you want. Go up and search on Carroll Lutheran Village Wellness. Search on that. You'll come up and you'll see Carroll Lutheran Village Wellness and a whole bunch of videos. Some of them exercise videos, but all 10 of my videos are on that site. So you or your families can access any of them if you have a computer. Again, thank you. I hope we all stay well. I hope I can do these things in person in the fall. If not, I will do a couple more on the TV. Have a good day, and as I say each week, stay safe. Thank you.